Driveway access. Posted with a red boundary line. Melissa Hargrove, the HO. A president served me a control line violation and approved daily fines. Like my concrete belonged to her clipboard, not my deed. I held up a recorded property survey report, the kind with a seal you can't argue with, and watched her eyes flick past it. "You don't get to decide my land," I said. Finally, someone fought back. County records don't recognize an HOA control line over my driveway. My deed file sits outside their covenants, and that's the only jurisdiction the system reads. The morning felt ordinary until I opened my mailbox and found a bright sheet of paper slapped across the front like a warning label. Control line violation. My address sat under the heading Neat and Confident. A small neighborhood map showed a thick red line cutting straight through the edge of my driveway, as if someone had drawn a boundary with a marker and decided it was reality. I peeled the notice off and turned it over. In the corner was a stamp, received. Below it, tidy bullet points, $50 per day escalation enforcement action. The language sounded official, like certainty printed on cheap paper. Then my phone chimed from the kitchen. Beep. The door chime from my camera system, someone on my porch. I opened the live view. Melissa Hargrove stood there with a clipboard pointing past my front steps toward my driveway, like she was showing someone where the problem lived. I stepped outside. "Morning, Melissa." She didn't waste time. "Ethan, we need to address your violation." I held up the paper. "This." "Yes," she said, tapping her clipboard. "The control line." I glanced at the map. "What control line?" "The one we enforce," she said. "The HOA's boundary." "My property isn't in the HOA," I said. Melissa's smile thinned. "You live in Cedar Ridge. This neighborhood has standards." "Standards aren't deeds," I replied. "Where did you get that line?" She flipped a page on her clipboard. "HOA records. It protects property values." "County records?" I asked. She ignored the question. "You crossed it when you widened the driveway edge." "I repaired cracked concrete," I said. "On my land." Melissa pointed at the driveway. "Right there. That's the boundary." The concrete looked the same as it always had. "A line on your map doesn't make it real," I said. "It's real enough for fines," she snapped. "Compliance isn't optional." Across the street, a curtain shifted. Janet Miller's window. She was watching. I kept my voice level. "Show me the document that gives you jurisdiction over my address." Melissa's cheeks flushed. "Are you refusing to comply?" "I'm refusing to be bullied," I said. She stepped closer, clipboard hugged like a badge. "HOA enforced a control line for a reason," she said loud enough for the street. "And you will comply." "Everyone does." For a moment, I just listened to the sprinkler tick and the quiet hum of my open garage. My tool bench sat there, the smell of oil and sawdust still in the air. I thought about the closing table in 2015, the one thing I'd insisted on, no HOA. I turned and walked inside, calm on purpose. I pulled my deed packet from the drawer and flipped to the page I'd bookmarked years ago. The county stamp sat at the top. In plain black letters, "Not subject to HOA covenants." I walked back out and held the page up. Melissa's eyes flicked to it, then away. "That's outdated," she said quickly. "Deeds don't expire," I replied. Her jaw tightened. She jabbed her pen at the notice. "Read the back." I did. The last line was printed like a threat, dressed up as Procedure Enforcement Inspection, scheduled tomorrow, 8 o'clock a.m. Melissa's smile returned thin and satisfied. "Be ready," she said, turning away. I watched her leave, clipboard swinging at her side. Then I looked at my driveway, my concrete, my land now split in my mind by a line that didn't exist. Tomorrow at 8, she wasn't coming to talk. She was coming to enforce. By late afternoon, the whole neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath. The clubhouse sat at the center of Cedar Ridge like a little courthouse nobody asked for. Out front, the bulletin board was packed with flyers, pool hours, dog reminders, a community standards update printed in bold like it mattered more than the weather. And somewhere nearby, someone had fired up a grill. The smell of BBQ drifted across the parking lot, sweet and smoky, the kind of scent that usually made you hungry. That day, it just made me tense. I was reading the newest flyer when I heard heels on pavement behind me. Ethan. I didn't turn right away. I already knew that voice. It carried the same tone as a warning label. When I faced her, Melissa Hargrove stood with her clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. Her sunglasses were perched on her head, her hair pulled tight, and her smile looked practiced. "You saw the notice," she said. "I saw your fantasy map," I replied. "Yes." Melissa's smile twitched. "It's not a fantasy. It's a community standard." "Standards aren't laws," I said. "Show me where that control line is recorded." She tapped the clipboard. "We don't need county records for internal enforcement." There it was again. That word, enforcement. Not deed, not statute, not ordinance. Just enforcement. "Internal," I repeated. "So you admit it's not legal?" Melissa leaned in slightly. "Legal isn't the only thing that matters. Compliance matters." I stared at her for a second, trying to decide if she actually believed what she was saying or if she just liked how it sounded. "You can't enforce a boundary that doesn't exist," I said. Melissa's eyes hardened. "You live here. You benefit from the community. You follow the rules." "I'm not in your HOA," I said, keeping my voice even. "I made sure of that when I bought my house." She waved a hand like she was swatting away a fly. "That's irrelevant. It's the only thing that matters," I said. A door opened behind us. A man stepped out of the clubhouse with a stack of papers in his hands. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Brian Knox, one of the board members. He slowed when he saw us, then hesitated like he'd walked into the middle of a storm. Melissa turned her smile on him. "Brian, tell Ethan what we discussed." Brian's eyes flicked to mine, then down to the pavement. We're just trying to keep things consistent. Consistent with what I asked." A line Melissa drew with a marker. Melissa snapped her head toward him. "The control line is established." Brian swallowed. It's in the HOA file." "Which file?" I pressed. "Where did it come from? Who verified it?" Brian didn't answer. He just shifted the papers in his hands like they were suddenly too heavy. Melissa's voice sharpened. "You're stalling." "I'm asking for proof," I said. "That's not stalling. That's reality." Her grip tightened on the clipboard. "Here's reality. Your fines start today." I raised my eyebrows. "You're fining me for crossing an imaginary line daily," she said, almost pleased. $50 a day until compliance is met. "And if I don't pay," I asked. Melissa's smile returned thin and confident. "Then it escalates." "Escalates how?" She took a breath like she'd been waiting for that question. "A lien. Towing. Legal action. We have options." "Towing," I repeated, incredulous. For what? Parking on my own driveway, Melissa didn't blink. If you're parked in violation of the control line, yes. Brian's face went pale. Melissa, I don't know if we can. She cut him off with a look. We can. I let out a short laugh, the kind you do when something is so absurd you need air. You're talking like you own the street. I'm talking like I'm responsible for the community, she said, and you're undermining it. I'm protecting my property, I said. Melissa stepped closer, lowering her voice. You don't understand how this works. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said. You say enforcement because you don't have law. Her eyes flashed. Watch your tone. Watch your jurisdiction, I replied. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air smelled like charcoal and sauce, and behind the clubhouse windows, I could see silhouettes shifting people inside, pretending not to watch. Then a soft voice came from my left. Ethan. I turned. Janet Miller stood a few feet away, her arms crossed over a cardigan. She looked like she'd been out for a walk and just happened to stumble into a showdown, but her eyes were sharp. Janet, I said. She glanced at Melissa, then back to me. Don't waste your breath arguing with her. Melissa scoffed. This is HOA business. Janet didn't flinch. This is bully business. Melissa's mouth tightened. If you're not part of the board, you can mind your own. Janet stepped forward half a pace. He is minding his own. That's the point. I watched Melissa's face the way control slipped for a second, before she grabbed it again. Janet leaned toward me and lowered her voice. Measure it, she said. Get a real survey. Shut her up with paper she can't fake. Melissa heard it anyway. Her head snapped toward Janet. That won't change anything. It'll change everything, Janet said calmly. Because then everyone will see who's lying. Brian shifted again, eyes darting between us like he wanted to disappear. Melissa straightened, forcing her smile back into place. This conversation is over, she said. You'll receive instructions. I already received your threat, I said. Now I'm asking for proof. She lifted her clipboard slightly. The proof is that I'm telling you. I stared at her. That's not proof. That's ego. Her eyes went cold. You don't get to decide where your land ends, she said, each word clipped like a stamp. I opened my mouth to respond, but she was already turning away, heels clicking toward the clubhouse door. Brian lingered for a second, looking like he might say something. Then, he just followed her inside, shoulders tight. Janet exhaled. She's going to make this ugly, she murmured. She already has, I said. My phone buzzed in my pocket as if to prove her right. I pulled it out and saw a new email notification. The subject line hit me like a punch. Received compliance hearing attendance required. I stared at it, feeling my chest tighten. Melissa wasn't just playing neighborhood games anymore. She was building a paper trail, one she planned to bury me under. I was halfway through my second cup of diner coffee when my phone buzzed again. Another HOA email. Another reminder that Melissa didn't sleep unless she was planning something. I stared at the screen for a moment, then locked it and took one slow breath. The diner was warm and familiar steel napkin holders, a faded home fries sign, the same waitress calling everyone hon. Outside the window, a school bus hissed to a stop at the corner. Kids piled out with backpacks, bouncing loud and careless in the way kids are when the world hasn't tried to take something from them yet. I envied that for a second. Then I heard tires on gravel. Not a bus. Not a neighbor. Something heavier. I paid my bill and stepped out into the morning air, the coffee still burning in my hand. I drove home with my jaw clenched, already knowing what I was going to find. When I turned onto my street, I saw them. 3 people clustered at the edge of my driveway like it was a crime scene. Melissa stood in the middle clipboard, in hand sunglasses on posture straight. 2 HOA board members hovered behind her. One of them was Brian. The other was a woman I barely recognized holding a tape measure like she'd been handed a weapon and didn't know how to use it. And they were already on my concrete. I parked at the curb and stepped out. "Get off my property," I called before I even reached them. Melissa turned slowly like she was disappointed I'd shown up. "Good morning, Ethan," she said. "We're documenting violations." I lifted my phone and tapped the record button. The screen showed her face calm and smug. "Say that again," I said. She didn't hesitate. "We're documenting violations of the control line." "That's my driveway," I said. "You're trespassing." The woman with the tape measure glanced at Melissa, then down at the concrete. She looked uneasy. Melissa pointed toward the edge of my driveway, where it met the grass. "The control line runs right here. You crossed it." I took a step closer, careful not to raise my voice. "There is no control line." Melissa sighed like I was being difficult on purpose. "There is now." Brian shifted behind her. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. "Brian," I said, still recording, "you're okay with this?" He swallowed. "We're just doing an inspection." "An inspection requires permission," I replied. "Or a warrant." "You have neither." Melissa snapped her fingers at the woman with the tape measure. "Mark it." The woman hesitated. "Melissa, Mark it," Melissa repeated sharper. The tape measure clicked out with a metallic rattle. The woman crouched near the driveway edge, measuring like she was trying to prove something with numbers that didn't belong to her. Then she pulled out a piece of white chalk. My stomach tightened. "Don't do that," I warned. She looked up, uncertain. You're drawing on my property," I said. "Stop." Melissa stepped forward. "Let her work." I kept my phone steady. "Melissa, I'm telling you right now you are trespassing. I'm recording. And I'm asking you to leave." Melissa's smile didn't move. "You can record all you want. This is enforcement." Enforcement. That word again like she thought it was magic. The chalk scraped against my driveway. A thick white line appeared crooked and ugly, cutting across the concrete like a scar. Something in me snapped, not into violence, not into shouting, but into clarity. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. I pointed the camera at the chalk line. "You just marked my driveway. On video." Melissa tilted her head. "Good. Then you can't pretend you didn't know what I asked. That you're making things up." Her eyes narrowed. "You're in violation." "I'm on my own land," I said. "You're the violation." Brian finally spoke, his voice low. "Ethan, maybe just pay the fine and we can..." "No." I cut in. "That's how this spreads." Melissa's expression sharpened. "Fines begin immediately," she said. $50 a day. And if I don't pay, I asked. Her lips curled slightly. "Then we escalate." I let the word hang. Escalate, how Melissa looked pleased, like she'd been waiting for me to ask. Lien. Legal fees. And towing. "Towing," I repeated, disbelief turning my voice colder. "You're going to tow my truck off my driveway if it's parked over the control line," she said, as if she were reading from a script. I stared at her. "That's not law." Melissa stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. It doesn't have to be. Then she straightened again, loud enough for the street. You don't get to decide where your land ends. She said it like a verdict, like she'd practiced it. I held my phone up, capturing every syllable. Across the street, Janet's front door opened. She walked onto her porch, arms, crossed, eyes locked on Melissa. Melissa, Janet called, "You're out of your mind." Melissa didn't even look at her. "This is HOA business." Janet pointed at my driveway. "That man isn't in your HOA." Melissa snapped her head toward Janet. "He lives here. He benefits from the community." Janet scoffed. "So do squirrels." "You gonna find them too?" One of the board members snorted before catching herself. Melissa's face tightened. "This inspection is happening." I stepped forward, still calm, still recording. "Then here's what's happening next. You're leaving, or I'm filing a trespass report." Melissa's smile returned, small and dangerous. "Go ahead. File whatever you want." The woman with the chalk stood up, dusting her hands like she'd just finished dirty work. The white line sat on my driveway, bright against the gray concrete. Melissa turned to walk away, and as she passed me, she said quietly, "You're going to regret making this difficult." I watched her and the board members retreat toward the sidewalk. Brian glanced back, once guilt flashing in his eyes. Then he looked away. Janet stepped off her porch and crossed the street, stopping beside me. "You can't argue with a person like that," she said softly. "I wasn't arguing," I replied. "I was documenting." Janet nodded at the chalk line. "Then don't guess. Don't negotiate. Measure it." I looked down at the line again. A fake boundary sitting on my real land like a challenge. I drove straight to the post office. The clerk recognized me and raised an eyebrow when I asked for certified mail forms. I filled them out slowly, carefully, like each pen stroke was a brick in a wall. When I dropped the envelope into the slot, it made a hollow thump that felt final. Back in my truck, I stared at my phone for a long second. Then I tapped a number Janet had scribbled on a scrap of paper. A man answered on the second ring. "Ramirez Surveying." I swallowed once. "Yeah," I said. "I need my land measured." And as I pulled out of the parking lot, I felt something shift inside me, something solid. Melissa wanted a line so badly. Fine. So I had the land measured. Dale Ramirez pulled up just before noon in a white pickup with his company name on the door and a ladder rack that looked like it had seen every county road in Ohio. He stepped out slowly, calm as a man who'd spent his whole life watching other people panic. A sun-faded hat shaded his face. A clipboard was tucked under one arm, and in his other hand he carried a hard plastic case like it held something delicate. "Ethan Cole?" he asked. "That's me," I said, walking down my driveway to meet him. The heat off the concrete shimmered in waves. My garage door was open behind me, tools lined up on my bench, like they were standing at attention. Dale nodded once. "You're the one with the control line problem." I let out a short breath. "Yeah. Apparently my driveway crossed an invisible border." Dale didn't smile, but his eyes held a flicker of understanding. People love borders when they think it gives them power. He opened the case and pulled out a tripod, the metal legs clicking as he extended them. He set it down near the edge of my driveway and adjusted it with practiced hands. I watched him work the way he didn't rush, the way he didn't perform. Just method, just precision. Before we start, I said, "I want everything recorded." Dale looked up. "That's smart." I positioned my phone on the tool bench inside my garage, angled toward the driveway. Then I stepped back out, feeling my pulse steady for the first time in days. Dale walked the perimeter with a measuring wheel marking small points with bright paint. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an orange stake. He placed it at the first point and raised a small mallet. The sound echoed off the quiet street. Thunk! The stake sank into the soil beside my driveway like a flag. Thunk! Another stake went in farther down, bright orange against the green grass. Thunk! Each one felt like a sentence being written in a language Melissa couldn't twist. I exhaled slowly. So this is official, Dale kept working. Official is a funny word, he said. But yes, this is a recorded measurement. It's not opinion. He checked his instrument, then called out numbers, as if he were reading coordinates from the earth itself. The street stayed quiet until the sound of a car door closing cut through the air. I turned my head. Melissa was there. She hadn't parked in her driveway. She'd parked halfway up the street like she didn't want to be seen arriving too eagerly. Her sunglasses were back on her head, and her clipboard was in her hands, like always. Brian followed behind her, slower shoulders tight. He looked like a man walking into a room where he already knew he'd lose. Melissa's eyes locked on the orange stakes immediately. "What is this?" she demanded. I kept my voice calm. "A survey." "You didn't notify the board," she snapped. "I didn't need to," I said. "It's my property." Melissa stepped closer, heels clicking against the concrete. "Those markers are not authorized." Dale didn't look up right away. He finished checking a reading, wrote something down, then finally turned toward her. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "I'm a licensed land surveyor." Melissa lifted her chin. "And I'm the HOA president." Dale nodded once, like he'd heard that sentence before, from people who thought it mattered more than it did. "Congratulations." Brian's mouth twitched like he wanted to laugh and didn't dare. Melissa ignored him and pointed at the stake nearest my driveway. "That's not the control line." Dale glanced at the marker, then at his clipboard. "This is the property line." Melissa's face tightened. "HOA records show otherwise." "Then your records are wrong," Dale said, matter of fact. I watched Melissa's expression shift. Not confusion, not doubt. Anger. "You can't just come in here and declare things," she said sharply. Dale's voice stayed steady. "I'm not declaring. I'm measuring." Melissa turned toward me like I'd betrayed some unspoken rule. "You're wasting money to avoid compliance." I lifted my eyebrows. "I'm spending money to stop you from stealing my land." Brian cleared his throat. "Melissa, maybe we should." She shot him a look so cold he stopped mid-sentence. Dale stepped toward the edge of my driveway and pointed at the chalk line the HOA had drawn earlier. The white mark still sat there, ugly and crooked. "Who did that?" he asked. Melissa didn't answer. "I did. They did. Yesterday." Dale's jaw tightened slightly. "That's not how boundaries work." Melissa snapped. "Boundaries work how the community decides." Dale looked at her, then really looked at her, like he was finally seeing the person behind the clipboard. "No," he said. "Boundaries work how the county records them." Melissa's voice rose. "This neighborhood has standards." Dale reached into his bag and pulled out a folded packet of papers. He flipped it open and showed the first page. There was an embossed seal at the top, a clean header, a signature line. "This is my report," he said. "It will match the recorded plat, and it will hold up anywhere that matters." Melissa's eyes flicked to the seal. For the first time, she looked uncertain just for a second. Then she recovered and scoffed. That doesn't mean anything to the HOA. Dale's expression didn't change. It means something to the law. Melissa's cheeks flushed. You don't get to override the board. Dale pointed again, this time to the orange stake sitting exactly where the ground said it belonged. That control line didn't exist, he said, clear and flat. It was never recorded. It was never verified. Someone made it up. The words landed heavy. Brian stared at the stake like he'd just realized the ground beneath his feet had been moved. Melissa's lips parted, then pressed together. Her hand tightened around her clipboard until her knuckles went pale. I felt my shoulders loosen just slightly. Not because I was celebrating, because I finally had something solid, something she couldn't talk her way around. Melissa stepped back, eyes hard. This isn't over, she said. It can be, I replied, if you stop. Her smile returned, sharp and small. We don't stop enforcement because someone hired a surveyor. Dale folded his report again and tucked it into his clipboard. You should, he said, before this gets expensive. Melissa turned on her heel, looking at Brian like he was supposed to follow. He hesitated, eyes on the stake, then finally moved after her. As she walked away, Melissa didn't bother lowering her voice. We'll enforce it anyway, she said. And the way she said it made my stomach tighten again, because now I knew exactly what kind of person I was dealing with. Not someone who wanted the truth, someone who wanted the last word. The Cedar Ridge clubhouse had never been that full. Folding chairs were crammed into rows, and people stood along the walls with their arms crossed, pretending they were only there because they wanted to stay informed. The bulletin board by the entrance was layered with fresh flyers, and someone had taped up a new one in the center, like a crown jewel community standards enforcement update. Outside, the smell of BBQ drifted in through the open door, mixing with cheap coffee from a metal urn on a side table. It should have felt like a neighborhood event. Instead, it felt like a trial. Melissa stood at the front of the room behind a plastic folding table, her clipboard laid out like evidence. 2 board members sat beside her, including Brian, who looked like he'd rather be stuck in traffic than sitting under those fluorescent lights. Melissa tapped her pen against the table twice. All right, she said, loud and crisp. We're going to begin. The room quieted. Phones came out. People leaned forward like they didn't want to miss the show. Melissa smiled as if she owned the air. We've had repeated violations of the control line, she announced, flipping a page on her clipboard. Certain residents have refused compliance despite multiple notices. My name didn't come yet, but I could feel it waiting. Melissa's eyes swept the room, then landed on me. Ethan Cole. A few heads turned. Janet sat 2 rows behind me, her mouth set in a hard line. Melissa lifted a paper and held it up. Mr. Cole has been crossing the established control line at the edge of his driveway. I stayed seated, calm. It's not established. Melissa ignored me. He has also interfered with enforcement inspections. By telling you to get off my property, I asked. Murmurs moved through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Isn't he outside the HOA?" Melissa raised her voice. This is not a debate. This is enforcement. There it was again. Enforcement. Like she could say it enough times to make it law. She reached under her clipboard and pulled out a laminated sheet, her precious HOA map. The thick red line was drawn across it like a scar. This, she said, tapping the red line, is the control boundary. It protects property values. It keeps the neighborhood uniform. A man in the back muttered, "Looks like a kindergarten drawing." A few people chuckled, quickly swallowed. Melissa's smile tightened. It was approved by the board. Brian's head dipped slightly, as if he wanted to disappear into his chair. I stood up slowly. Not dramatic, just steady. "Melissa," I said, "you can't approve a property line." She tilted her head, pretending patience. "Ethan, sit down. You've already disrupted enough." I didn't sit. "You want to talk about boundaries?" "Fine. Let's talk about boundaries." Melissa lifted her chin. "You're in violation." I reached into the folder I'd brought and pulled out Dale's survey report. The paper was crisp, official stamped, and signed. I walked forward and set it down on the table in front of her. It landed with a flat, heavy sound. Thump. The room went quiet in a way I could feel in my ribs. Melissa stared at it like I'd dropped something dirty on her table. "What is that?" she asked. "A recorded survey," I said, "by a licensed land surveyor." She scoffed. "That doesn't matter here." A woman near the aisle leaned forward. "What do you mean it doesn't matter?" Melissa's eyes flicked toward her, then back to me. HOA enforcement doesn't require outside interference. "Outside interference," I repeated. "You mean facts?" Melissa grabbed her laminated map and held it up higher. "Our records show the control line right there." I pointed at the survey. "And county records show the actual property line right here." Melissa's face reddened. "You're trying to confuse people." "I'm trying to show people the truth," I said. Someone near the front spoke up. "Wait. Ethan, are you even part of the HOA?" I answered before Melissa could. "No. My deed isn't under HOA covenants." That hit the room like a dropped plate. A few people turned to each other. One man said loud enough to carry, "Then why is she fining him?" Melissa snapped. "Because he benefits from the community." Janet's voice cut through the room sharp as a bell. "So do the raccoons. You gonna send them a notice too?" Laughter broke out, nervous at first, then real. Melissa's eyes flashed. "This isn't funny," she said. "It kind of is," someone else replied. "You're enforcing a line that isn't even real." Melissa slammed her palm on the table, not hard enough to be violent, just enough to demand attention. "Order." The word sounded ridiculous coming from her mouth in a room full of neighbors. I kept my voice calm, but I made sure everyone could hear me. "This is the only line that matters." I tapped the survey report with 2 fingers. "This one," I said. "The one that's measured, recorded, verified." Melissa stared at the paper, then at me like she couldn't decide whether to rip it up or pretend it didn't exist. Brian finally spoke, voice tight. "Melissa, we should review this." She turned on him. "No. We don't bend standards for one homeowner." "It's not bending," Brian said quietly. "It's correcting." Melissa's mouth twisted. "You're undermining the board." The crowd murmured again. Phones were still recording. People weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at her. And she knew it. Melissa forced a smile, thin and bright. "The board will take this under advisement." A man in the back called out, "So you're dropping the fines?" Melissa's smile froze. "Not at this time." Another voice, sharper, "Are you going to stop trespassing on his driveway?" Melissa's eyes narrowed. "Enforcement inspections will continue." I felt my jaw tighten. Even after being proven wrong, she leaned forward, voice low but carrying. "Tomorrow morning," she said, "we enforce compliance. With or without your cooperation." The room went still again. That was the moment everyone understood. This wasn't about the neighborhood. It was about her winning. I looked around at the faces, some angry, some scared, some finally awake. Janet met my eyes and gave a small nod like she'd been waiting for this exact turning point. I gathered my folder and stepped back from the table. Melissa straightened her papers, pretending she still controlled the room. But her hands were shaking enough to give her away. As people began to stand and talk in low, heated voices, I heard someone behind me mutter, half impressed and half stunned. Finally, someone fought back, and for the first time since that notice hit my mailbox, I believed I might actually win this lawfully and in the open. The next morning I woke up before my alarm, not because I was eager, because I knew she was coming. The sky was still gray-blue, and the street outside my window looked quiet enough to fool someone who didn't know what was scheduled. I pulled on jeans and a work shirt, then stepped into the garage with the lights off, listening. For a few seconds, all I heard was the hum of my refrigerator through the wall and the faint chirp of birds waking up. Then it came. A sharp, wet sound cutting across the silence. Spray hiss. I froze in place. Spray hiss. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. It was the sound of someone making a mark they wanted to last. I stepped out of the garage and onto my driveway. Two men in reflective vests stood near the edge of my concrete, one holding a red spray can, the other holding a measuring tape. A fresh red line was already crawling across my driveway like a wound. Melissa stood behind them with her clipboard posture, straight face set like she was posing for a photo. I lifted my phone and hit record. Morning, I called loud enough for the camera to catch it. State your names. Why are you on my property? The worker with the spray can hesitated. His eyes flicked toward Melissa like he was waiting for permission to speak. Melissa answered for him. They're contractors. That's not an answer, I said. Get off my driveway. Melissa's smile didn't reach her eyes. We're enforcing compliance. You're trespassing, I said, and you're damaging my property. The man with the spray can shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Ma'am, do we have paperwork for this? Melissa snapped her head toward him. Just keep painting. He swallowed and looked down at the orange survey stake sitting in the grass a few feet away. It was bright in the early light, impossible to miss. He lowered his voice. That stake means something. It means nothing, Melissa said sharply. It's interference. I stepped closer, keeping my voice calm. That stake marks the recorded property line. You're painting over it. The second worker, the one with the tape measure, frowned. Recorded, Melissa's tone turned icy. You were hired to do a job. The first worker glanced at me. Sir, we were told this was HOA property. It's not, I said. And you're on camera. Melissa waved a hand like my phone was a fly. Record all you want. It won't stop enforcement. The spray can hissed again, and the red line stretched farther across my driveway. Spray hiss. My jaw tightened. I didn't shout. I didn't step into anyone's space. I just lifted my phone higher and said clearly, Melissa, you're being warned. Leave now. She walked toward me, slow and deliberate. You don't get to decide where your land ends. I stared at her. Actually, I do. That's the point of owning land. Melissa leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume again, sharp and controlling. You're embarrassing yourself, she whispered. Then she turned and snapped at the worker. Finish the line. The worker hesitated again. His hand trembled slightly as he held the can. He wasn't a villain. He was a guy trying to get paid. I pointed at the orange stake. You paint over that marker, you're participating in something illegal. The worker looked at Melissa. Ma'am, I'm not trying to get in trouble. Melissa's voice rose. Then do your job. Across the street, Janet's porch light clicked on. Her front door opened. She stepped outside in slippers, arms crossed, watching like she'd been waiting for the first move. Melissa, Janet called. You really doing this? Melissa didn't look at her. This is HOA business. Janet laughed once, sharp and humorless. No, honey. This is you losing your mind in public. The worker lowered the spray can. I need confirmation this is permitted. Melissa turned on him. I am the confirmation. I didn't waste another second. I hit speakerphone and dialed the county code enforcement number Dale had given me. It rang twice. A woman answered. County code enforcement. My name is Ethan Cole. I said, voice steady. I have HOA contractors trespassing and marking my driveway with paint. I have a recorded survey. I need an officer dispatched. The woman's tone shifted. Are they on your property right now? Yes, I said. And I'm recording. Stay on the line, she said. We're sending someone. Melissa's head snapped toward me. Who are you calling? Someone who actually has jurisdiction, I replied. Her face tightened. You're wasting their time. I kept my phone up, camera still rolling. No, Melissa, you are. The worker with the tape measure backed up a step. Ma'am, I'm not comfortable. Melissa jabbed a finger toward the red line. Finish, now. The spray can hissed again, weaker this time, like the man was trying to do the minimum without making it worse. Then a new sound cut through the morning. A truck door slammed. I turned my head and saw Dale's white pickup pulling up at the curb. He stepped out fast, no hesitation, eyes going straight to the red paint on my driveway and the orange stakes in the grass. He walked up with his clipboard in hand, calm but firm. What's going on here? He asked. Melissa lifted her chin. We're enforcing HOA standards. Dale looked at the red line, then at the stake, then at Melissa. You painted over a recorded property marker. Melissa scoffed. It's just paint. It's not just paint, Dale said. It's a false boundary on someone else's land. The worker with the spray can exhaled like he'd been waiting for someone official to say it out loud. Sir, we were told this was allowed. Dale pointed at the orange stake. That marker is tied to a recorded survey. You don't touch it. You don't paint over it. You don't enforce over it. Melissa's eyes flashed. You don't tell me what I enforce. Dale's voice stayed level. The county does. As if the world wanted to underline his words, a patrol car turned onto my street tires, rolling slow lights, not flashing, but presence heavy. The workers stepped back immediately. Melissa didn't. The officer parked near my driveway and got out, one hand resting near his belt, not threatening, just ready. He looked from me to Melissa to the red paint line. What's the issue? He asked. I held up my phone. Trespassing and property damage, I said. They're marking my driveway. I have it recorded. Melissa stepped forward like she was about to take control of the conversation. Officer, this is HOA enforcement. The officer's eyes narrowed slightly. Ma'am, HOA doesn't override property rights. Melissa's mouth tightened. We have authority here. Dale stepped beside me and held up his clipboard. I'm the licensed surveyor, he said. They just painted over a recorded marker. The officer looked at Melissa again. Ma'am, I'm going to need everyone to stop what they're doing. Melissa's face went stiff, like her body didn't know how to obey a command that wasn't hers. Then she said it clear, loud, and certain. "Write your report," she told the officer. "I'm not stopping." And in that moment, I realized this had finally crossed the line she couldn't redraw with a marker. The courthouse smelled like floor polish and old paper, the kind of place that reminded you. Rules existed long before any HOA president decided to play judge. I sat on a hard bench outside the courtroom, my folder balanced on my knee. Dale stood beside me in the same sun-faded hat he'd worn in my driveway, calm as ever. Across the hall, Melissa sat upright with her attorney legs crossed, chin lifted like she was still at the clubhouse table. Brian hovered near the water fountain, not sitting with her, not sitting with me. Just stuck in the middle like guilt had its own gravity. A clerk opened the courtroom door and called our case. The sound of her voice echoed down the hall, flat and practiced. We filed in. Inside the room was smaller than I expected. No drama, no grand speeches, just wood benches, a seal on the wall, and a judge who looked like he'd seen every kind of power trip a person could pull. Melissa's attorney stood first. "Your Honor," he began, "this is a matter of community safety and neighborhood standards. The association has a duty to enforce." The judge lifted a hand. Duty to enforce what exactly? The attorney didn't miss a beat. A control line. A boundary established to prevent encroachment and protect property values. Melissa nodded along, lips pressed into a confident smile. The judge turned his eyes toward me. "Mr. Cole." I stood. My voice didn't shake, but my heart was pounding anyway. "Your Honor, the HOA is enforcing a boundary that doesn't exist. They've issued fines, threatened a lien, threatened towing, and trespassed onto my driveway to paint a line across my property." Melissa's attorney scoffed. "He's exaggerating." I opened my folder and held up a printed photo of the red paint line. "This is my driveway," I said, "and this is their control line." The judge looked at the photo, then back at Melissa. "Did the association authorize this marking?" Melissa's attorney started to answer, but Melissa leaned forward and spoke over him. "Yes," she said. "It was necessary." The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. Necessary for what purpose? Melissa lifted her chin higher. Compliance. That word again, like it was holy. The judge turned back to me. "Do you have documentation of the property boundary?" "Yes, Your Honor." I handed the bailiff the survey report. The embossed seal caught the courtroom light for a second before it disappeared into the judge's hands. The judge flipped through the pages, slowly reading without expression. Then he looked up. Mr. Ramirez Dale stepped forward. "Yes, Your Honor." "You're the surveyor." "I am," Dale said. "Licensed in this county. The markers and report reflect recorded plats." Melissa's attorney jumped in. "But HOA records." The judge held up a hand again, stopping him mid-sentence. "HOA records are not county records." Melissa's face tightened. Her attorney tried a different angle. "Your Honor, the association is concerned about safety. The driveway expansion could impact drainage visibility." "It's not expanded," I said, then caught myself and added, "It was repaired." The judge looked at me. "Did the HOA provide any engineering report, inspection, or ordinance supporting this control line?" Melissa's attorney hesitated. "Not specifically." "Your Honor, but the board." The judge leaned forward slightly. "I asked for an ordinance, a statute, a recorded boundary." Silence settled over the room. Brian shifted in his seat like he wanted to melt into the bench. The judge turned to him. "Mr. Knox." "You're on the board." Brian stood stiff. "Yes, Your Honor." Did the board verify this boundary with the county? Ryan swallowed hard. No, Your Honor. Melissa's head snapped toward him. Brian, the judge's voice cut through the air sharper now. Ms. Hargrove, do not interrupt. Melissa froze the first time I'd seen her forced into stillness. The judge tapped the survey report with one finger. Standards are not statutes, he said, clear and final, and an HOA president is not a property authority. Melissa's cheeks flushed, but she stayed silent. The judge looked at me again. Mr. Cole, you're requesting an order to stop harassment and prevent further trespass. Yes, Your Honor, I said. I want them to stop. I want the markings removed, and I want the fines and threats to end. The judge nodded once, then picked up his pen. The clerk slid a document forward. The judge signed with quick, practiced strokes. The stamp came down a moment later. Filed. The sound was soft, but it hit like a door closing. The judge looked up at Melissa. Remove every mark today, he said. Cease enforcement actions against this property immediately, and do not return to Mr. Cole's land without lawful cause. Melissa's mouth opened as if she might argue. The judge didn't give her the chance. This hearing is concluded. As we stood to leave, I caught a glimpse of her face, tight, controlled, furious. And I knew, even with a court order in my hand, she wasn't the type to accept losing quietly. By the time the sun cleared the treetops, the red paint line on my driveway looked less like a threat and more like a bad memory that refused to fade. A crew truck idled at the curb. Two men stepped out with buckets, scrub brushes, and a pressure washer that hummed low, waiting. One of them glanced at me. You the homeowner? Yeah, I said. That's mine. He nodded toward the red line. We were told to remove it today. I didn't need to ask who told them. The court order had done what my voice couldn't. The first brush hit the concrete with a gritty scrape. The second followed. Water sprayed white and sharp, cutting through the morning air. The pressure washer hissed like it was erasing something poisonous. Slowly, the red bled into pink, then into nothing. I stood in the open garage doorway, arms folded, watching the lye get scrubbed off my property inch by inch. Janet crossed the street with a paper cup of coffee in her hand. She stopped beside me without asking, like she'd earned the right after everything she'd seen. Well, she said, watching the crew work, would you look at that? I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Turns out reality wins when you force it into the light. Janet sipped her coffee. Melissa still breathing fire. She didn't show up, I said. Not after court. Janet smiled faintly. Smartest thing she's done all week. The crew kept scrubbing. The driveway looked raw where the paint had been, like the concrete was relieved to be itself again. A car pulled up behind the crew truck. Not Melissa's. A silver sedan I didn't recognize. A man stepped out in a button-down shirt and khakis, holding a folder like it was heavy with responsibility. He approached carefully, eyes scanning the scene as if he didn't want to be mistaken for the enemy. Mr. Cole, he asked. That's me, I said, stepping forward. He offered a small, nervous smile. I'm Thomas Reed, acting board representative. Janet snorted softly beside me. Acting. Thomas pretended he didn't hear. I wanted to speak with you briefly. On behalf of the association. I waited. Thomas opened the folder and pulled out a letter, holding it with both hands like it might bite him. This is a formal apology, he said. For the harassment, the unauthorized markings, and the enforcement actions taken against your property. I didn't reach for it yet. And the fines, Thomas nodded quickly. Voided. All of them. Retroactively. Janet leaned closer, voice low. You hearing this, Ethan? I kept my eyes on Thomas. Why now? Thomas swallowed. Because the judge's order was clear, and because the board reviewed the situation. I almost laughed. Reviewed. Thomas's cheeks reddened. We made mistakes. Mistakes don't usually come with threats of towing, I said. Thomas nodded again faster. I understand. And we're correcting it. He pulled out another sheet of paper, this one thicker with signatures at the bottom. We're also rewriting the enforcement policy, he said. Any boundary-related action now requires recorded county verification. No exceptions. Janet let out a low whistle. Look at that. A rule that makes sense. Thomas offered a tight smile. It's necessary. I took the apology letter from his hand and glanced at it. The words were clean, careful, and probably written by someone terrified of being sued again. But it wasn't the paper that mattered. It was the fact that he was standing on the curb, not on my driveway. It was the fact that the red line was disappearing under water and scrubbing. Thomas cleared his throat. Ms. Hargrove has been removed from enforcement duties. Janet raised an eyebrow. Removed, Thomas's eyes flicked away. She's no longer representing the board in any capacity. I didn't ask where she went. I didn't need the details. The neighborhood would handle that in whispers and side eyes and quiet distance. Thomas shifted the folder under his arm. If you'd like, we can also reimburse you for the survey cost. I looked at him for a long moment. Keep your money, I said. Just keep your hands off my land. Thomas nodded, relief washing over his face. Understood. He turned to leave, then hesitated. Mr. Cole. I'm sorry. This time it sounded human. Good, I said. Be sorry enough to remember. He walked back to his car and drove away. The crew finished the last stretch of paint. The concrete looked clean again, sunlit and plain, like it had never been marked at all. Janet watched the water run off the edge into the grass. You know what I like most about this, she said. What I asked. She pointed at the driveway. They had to erase it in front of everyone. Not just you, I nodded slowly. Yeah. The street felt different after that. Not louder, not friendlier, just honest. Later, I sat at the diner with a plate of eggs and toast, the receipt folded under my coffee cup, like proof the world was still normal. Outside cars passed. People lived their lives. And for the first time in days, my phone stayed quiet. No notices, no threats, no fake lines. When I pulled into my driveway that afternoon, the grass looked freshly cut, the concrete clean, the orange survey stake still standing in the soil like a quiet witness. My home felt like mine again. And as I stood there looking at the place, Melissa tried to take from me with a marker and a title. One thought settled in my chest, solid and steady. Finally, someone fought back. So tell me, if an HOA drew a line on your land and dared you to accept it, would you? By sundown, the posted court order was taped to the clubhouse bulletin board, the seal catching light every time the door swung open. Neighbors stopped, read it, and nodded like they'd been waiting for someone to echo enough out loud. Justice isn't loud, it's steady. That red paint came off my driveway, but what really disappeared was the fear of being pressed into surrender by a title and a marker. Finally, someone fought back. If you've ever been cornered by someone abusing rules, tell me what line you refused to let them cross.